For decades, fans have speculated about the real story between two of country music's greatest legends, George Strait and Alan Jackson. Were they close friends, quiet rivals, or something far more complicated? At 73, Strait isn't holding back, and what he just revealed is turning heads across the country music world. Long before the cowboy hat became a crown, before the platinum record sold out stadiums and the title King of Country, George Harvey Strait was just a quiet Texas boy with a heart full of music and a story no one saw coming. Born on May 18, 1952 in Poteet, Texas, a town so small it barely shows up on the map, George grew up far from the bright lights of Nashville or the celebrity buzz of Los Angeles. He was raised in nearby Pearsall on a 2,000-acre cattle ranch that belonged to his father. Life was simple, hard, and honest. His father, John Strait, was a junior high school math teacher and rancher, a man who believed in work, respect, and keeping your head down. And maybe that's where George learned his lifelong philosophy: say little, sing loud, and let the music do the talking. But here's something most fans don't realize. George didn't start off chasing country music. In high school, he played in a garage rock band. It wasn't until he joined the U.S. Army and was stationed in Hawaii that something clicked. That's where he first began performing country music with a band called Rambling Country. And that far from home, surrounded by military life, is where the cowboy was born. Still, his early journey back home wasn't easy. After leaving the Army in the mid-1970s, George returned to Texas with a dream, a guitar, and very few connections. He enrolled at Southwest Texas State University, now Texas State University, and studied agriculture. But music kept calling. He began performing with a small local band, Stony Ridge, which he eventually renamed the Ace in the whole band. Week after week, he played tiny honky-tonks and dusty bars across South Texas. The venues were small, the crowds were smaller, but George had a voice that didn't need a spotlight. It demanded one. Even so, Nashville wasn't interested. He sent demo after demo to record labels, only to be rejected repeatedly. He was told his sound was too traditional, too old-fashioned, and not marketable. In an era where pop country was gaining traction, George's throwback style didn't fit the mold. But then came the twist no one expected. In 1981, thanks to a bit of luck and a lot of persistence, MCA Records gave him a shot. Just one single. A test, that song, Unwound. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cannon shot. Unwound tore through the airwaves and straight into the top 10. Suddenly, the man with the shy smile and classic voice had something Nashville couldn't ignore: momentum. And with it, he launched an unprecedented career of over 60 #1 singles, dozens of albums, and an unshakable grip on the genre he loved. But despite the fame, George never changed. He kept his private life out of the spotlight. He rarely gave interviews, and unlike many of his peers, he avoided controversy and gossip altogether. That silence, though, would eventually fuel questions, especially about his relationships in the industry. Talking about his relationships, one name kept coming up: Alan Jackson. Two towering figures in the same genre. Two men with similar values, musical tastes, and traditional styles. But while fans adored their duets and shared stage moments, others sensed distance. Why didn't they tour together more often? Why so few joint interviews? Was there quiet respect or quiet rivalry? The answers didn't come quickly, because true to form, George Strait remained silent. Until now. At 73, George has finally decided to open up. Not with drama or spectacle, but with the calm, grounded honesty that has defined his entire life. What he has revealed about his long, complex connection with Alan Jackson is both touching and unexpected. But to understand the full weight of it, let's go back again to the early 90s, when their paths first truly crossed in the public eye. Both men had emerged as defenders of real country music during a time when the genre was shifting. While other artists were blending rock and pop into their sound, George and Alan held firm. They valued steel guitars over synths, story-driven lyrics over catchy hooks. That made them outliers and allies. But with similar audiences and a changing industry, even quiet alliances could feel like competition. Yet, through it all, there was a mutual respect that never wavered. George once said privately to a close friend, as revealed in a 2018 radio interview, "Alan is the kind of guy I would tip my hat to, even when no one is watching." That quote would eventually take on more meaning than fans realized, especially when you consider what happened behind the scenes, like the time George reportedly stepped aside from a major award nomination to make room for Alan, or how both men lobbied privately for the return of traditional sounds to the Country Music Association's annual awards when the genre became increasingly pop-dominated. They were fighting the same fight, just not always side by side. It's those hidden moments unseen by cameras, unknown to fans, that reveal the truth of their relationship. And the truth is, George Strait didn't just respect Alan Jackson, he quietly admired him. Because the next part of George's journey, how he overcame personal tragedy, how he stayed loyal to his roots, and how he kept his crown without ever chasing it, is what truly defines the man behind the music. And it's in this part of his story that the full weight of his words about Alan Jackson will finally come into focus. While George Strait's career was climbing rapidly through the 80s and 90s, few realized the quiet pain he was carrying behind the scenes. For all his public poise and country charm, George was no stranger to heartbreak. In 1986, tragedy struck when his 13-year-old daughter, Jennifer Strait, was killed in a car accident in San Marcos, Texas. It was a devastating loss, one that George rarely spoke of publicly. He chose silence over spectacle, withdrawing further from media appearances and interviews. While the country music world rallied around him, George channeled his grief privately through music and family. The emotional impact of that loss became a defining moment in his life. Instead of spiraling or stepping back, he pressed forward with more conviction, grounded not in fame, but in faith and the memory of his daughter. He quietly founded the Jennifer Strait Memorial Foundation, which supports children's charities in Texas. But he did so without publicizing it widely. That, in many ways, was the essence of George Strait, doing the right thing without needing applause for it. This deep personal loss reshaped how he viewed the industry, his fans, and his fellow artists. While others were chasing headlines, George focused on substance. He avoided scandals, feuds, and the attention-grabbing machinery that so often surrounds country superstars. That approach set him apart and quietly built the foundation for one of the most respected reputations in modern music. As his career evolved into the 2000s, George didn't chase trends. He didn't change his image to appeal to younger audiences or pivot toward crossover sounds. Instead, he doubled down on traditional country music. When many executives advised him to modernize, he politely declined. He wasn't here to follow waves. He was the anchor. This quiet leadership earned him admiration from the next generation of artists, and one of the most vocal among them was Alan Jackson. Alan had always credited George Strait as one of his biggest influences. In multiple interviews over the years, he referred to George as a true north for country music, a symbol of integrity and authenticity. And while the two men rarely toured or collaborated in depth, their careers ran on nearly parallel tracks. Both Southern men with humble upbringings, both traditionalists in a genre that was constantly evolving, and both fiercely loyal to country's roots. Their bond, though largely understated, became more visible in the late 2000s. At award shows, fans began noticing moments of unspoken respect. Alan nodding from the crowd as George performed. George tipping his hat as Alan accepted an award. They weren't showy gestures, but to fans of real country, they meant everything. The mutual respect was further confirmed during George Strait's farewell tour in 2014. Aptly named The Cowboy Rides Away. At his final concert in Arlington, Texas, Alan Jackson performed alongside George in front of over 100,000 fans, the largest ticketed indoor concert in U.S. history, when the two shared the stage for Amarillo by Morning. It wasn't just a duet, it was a passing of the torch, a tribute, a silent nod to decades of shared purpose. But even then, George remained publicly reserved about the nature of their relationship. So, when he finally spoke years later, people listened. In a recent interview on a Texas-based country radio station in early 2025, George Strait, now 73, was asked about the state of country music and the artists he felt represented it best. He paused, then, in classic George fashion, he delivered a simple, heartfelt response. "You know, I've always had a lot of respect for Alan. He stood tall when the industry wanted us to bend. We didn't talk a lot, but we understood each other. That kind of loyalty, that's rare." The host clearly caught off guard, pressed further, asking if the two had ever experienced tension. George smiled, then added, "No tension, just two guys doing the same thing from different lanes. I always appreciated that he never compromised. That meant more to me than anything we could have said." That short statement sent fans into a frenzy. For years, theories swirled around the silence between them now. It all made sense. It wasn't rivalry, it was reverence. Strait's quiet admiration for Alan Jackson mirrored the very values he upheld throughout his career. Humility, consistency, and purpose without pretense. It wasn't about flashy collaborations or publicity stunts. It was about authenticity. Meanwhile, Alan Jackson, who has faced recent health challenges due to a degenerative nerve condition and Charcot-Marie tooth disease, was reportedly moved by George's comments. According to close friends, Alan called George after the interview aired. It was the first time in years the two had spoken at length. That conversation remains private, but what's emerged since is a visible closeness, one that fans hadn't seen before. George, who rarely posts on social media, shared a simple image a few weeks later. Two cowboy hats resting on a studio mic stand. No caption, just mutual understanding. As both men enter the twilight of their careers, their story, once shaped by mystery, is now defined by mutual respect. And for fans, that truth matters more than anything fiction ever could. The king of country and the tall, quiet outlaw didn't need to be loud about their bond. They just had to live it. And now that the truth is out, fans finally understand what many had always hoped was true. George Strait and Alan Jackson weren't distant stars. They were pillars, holding up the same house of country music from opposite ends, both refusing to let it fall. With a combined total of over 150 million albums sold and more than 100 #1 hits between them, George Strait and Alan Jackson didn't just dominate country music. They defined its boundaries. They created the framework for what a country could be when held tight to its roots, even as the industry around them shifted toward commercialism and crossover success. And today, their influence runs deeper than charts or awards. It's in the DNA of modern country music. As younger artists rise, many of them, whether traditionalists or genre blenders, still measure themselves against the quiet standards set by Strait and Jackson. Their work ethic, clean reputations, and refusal to be swayed by industry trends have become the gold standard. For many aspiring country artists, being successful no longer just means landing a hit. It means being respected like George. It means standing firm like Alan. This impact is seen most clearly in the world of today's stars. Luke Combs, who often performs covers of both artists in his live shows, has publicly said, "You can't call yourself country if you don't acknowledge what George and Alan built. They made it okay to be proud of your accent, your roots, your story." Combs, often praised for his own neo-traditional style, considers them his blueprint. Similarly, John Party, another staunch defender of traditional country, credits his sound to the foundation they built. They didn't yell about what they stood for, they just showed up year after year and reminded us where we came from. Even artists who have taken the genre in new directions, like Chris Stapleton or Cody Johnson, cite them as formative influences. For them, the question isn't whether George Strait or Alan Jackson was popular, but whether they were true. And in a time when authenticity is currency, Strait and Jackson's legacies have never been more relevant. Their influence even extends beyond music. In an industry often fueled by image and scandal, both men maintained quiet, private lives. George Strait has been married to his high school sweetheart Norma since 1971. Alan Jackson married Denise Jackson in 1979, and despite publicized marital challenges, they have remained together. Where personal branding often overshadows artistry, these long-lasting relationships offered something increasingly rare: stability and discretion. What also sets them apart is their restraint. They never claimed to be perfect or outspoken heroes of the genre. They didn't criticize the evolution of country music with bitterness. Instead, they simply held their ground and let time vindicate their style. And time did. As the 2010s saw country music become more influenced by pop, EDM, and hip-hop, many longtime listeners became disillusioned. They missed the fiddle, the steel guitar, the storytelling. And suddenly, the music of George Strait and Alan Jackson felt more essential than ever. Country radio might have changed, but the fans had not. This nostalgia-driven resurgence led to a deeper appreciation for their discographies. George Strait's Troubadour became an anthem for aging gracefully in the spotlight, while Alan Jackson's Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning was revisited as one of the most honest, unfiltered musical responses to national tragedy. In 2022, when Alan revealed his battle with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, the country community rallied behind him. Tributes poured in, not just from peers, but from new artists who grew up listening to him and modeled their careers after his. George Strait, characteristically private, released a short statement offering support. "Alan has always walked with grace, on and off stage, and I know he'll continue to do so." This kind of quiet brotherhood, unspoken for decades, was finally on full display. Meanwhile, George Strait's semi-retired status only enhanced his legend. After the world stopped touring regularly after 2014, he continued to perform selective shows, often to sold-out stadiums. And in doing so, he preserved a rare kind of mystique. When George plays now, it feels less like a concert and more like a national holiday for country fans. Their legacy has also been institutionalized. George Strait was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2006, a pivot toward authenticity in an age of performance. They taught an entire generation that it was okay to speak softly and sing truthfully, that you didn't need gimmicks or headlines to make an impact, that the weight of your words mattered more than the number of your stream. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded the world that country music at its core is about real lives, struggle, and pride. The cowboy hats weren't props. The stories weren't fabricated. They were reflections of the lives their audiences were living. Now, as George Strait enters his mid-70s and Alan Jackson continues to face the realities of a progressive illness, the two men stand as monuments, not just to country music, but to a way of being in the public eye. Honest, modest, resilient. In a 2024 interview, Lainey Wilson said it best. "They made space for people like me, and they never once asked for credit. And that's the ultimate irony. The two men who never demanded attention became the standard by which everyone else is measured. Their bond, long misunderstood, finally clarified, only deepens that impact. What began as two parallel careers has, in hindsight, become a shared chapter in country music history. One written not with loud declarations, but with quiet dignity.